Despite a lot of talks, 6 rounds of talks and an intervention, the war in Ukraine could not be avoided. In fact, Paris and Berlin have been central to diplomatic efforts to avert a showdown over Ukraine. Germany and France had mediated way back in 2014 when Russia had annexed Crimea and the eastern regions of Ukraine had declared independence. The two had brokered the Minsk agreements, and the two agreements aimed at ending the previous war in eastern Ukraine. While the fighting did not stop, for 8 years, Germany and France in particular had been keeping the channel open with Moscow, arguing for the need to keep the channels of communication open. But in the end, all efforts at diplomacy failed, and that's the reason why we're wondering if things are actually about to get worse in Ukraine. Take a look at this report, and then we go to our Ukrainian friends on the ground.
Through January and most of February 2022, Russia continued amassing its troops along the northern and eastern borders of Ukraine. Russian and Belarusian troops carried out a joint exercise very close to Ukraine's borders. Even as alarm bells began ringing across the capitals of Western democracies, Ukraine seemed to be sighted bang in the middle of Putin's crosshairs. But the master of Kremlin kept saying that this was just a military exercise, nothing more.
If it depends on us, the Russian Federation, there will be no war. We don't want war, but we will not allow violating our interests. And ignoring our interests, we will not allow either.
As tension kept mounting, countries began to ask their citizens to leave Ukraine. On February 13th, the presidents of USA and Ukraine had a telephonic conversation stressing the importance of pursuing diplomacy and deterrence in response to Russia's build-up on Ukraine's borders. President Zelensky invited President Biden to Kyiv, saying, "I'm convinced that your visit to Kyiv in the coming days would be a powerful signal and help stabilize the situation." A day before, on February 12th, the US had shifted its 150 National Guard troops that were posted there out of Ukraine. It also began asking its embassy staff to leave Kyiv. On the other side of the world, in Honolulu, US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said the risk of Russian military action is high enough and the threat is imminent enough that this is the prudent thing to do. In Germany, President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who had just been re-elected, said Putin should not underestimate the strength of Western resolve over Ukraine. He said, "I appeal to President Putin to loosen the noose around Ukraine's neck and join us in seeking a way to preserve peace in Europe." On 25th of February, Russian troops crossed the border with Ukraine. No amount of diplomacy, cajoling, threats, and implied action could deter Vladimir Putin from launching an invasion. On 24th of March, 1 month later, the UN General Assembly once again adopted a non-binding resolution demanding the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine and an immediate halt to the war. The previous such resolution was on 2nd of March. The current resolution, approved on March 24th, was favoured by 140 countries in the 193-member assembly. 4 countries, Syria, Belarus, North Korea and Eritrea, joined Russia in voting against it, while 38 countries, including India, abstained. A month of Russian advance and bombardment in Ukraine may not have brought Putin any closer to his objectives. But what the war has done is that it has brought economic sanctions raining down on Russia. Led by the US and the EU, trade and banking relations with the Russian Federation has been severely curtailed. Keeping pace with the general mood, many multinational companies too have suspended operations or have made announcements to that effect.
Nice to meet you. You're very welcome.
On 15th of March, in a show of solidarity by the European Union, the Prime Ministers of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia made their way to Kyiv. They spent a day in the city that had even that morning been hit by Russian missiles. While the EU and Ukrainian leaders were meeting in Kyiv, loud explosions were heard from the fighting on the western edge of the city.
We will never leave you alone. We will be with you because we know that you are fighting not only for your homes, for your freedom, for your security, but also for ours.
Diplomatically, it has been a two-pronged strategy that the countries opposed to Russian action in Ukraine have adopted, while being very careful to not get dragged into the actual military conflict. On the one hand, there has been the severest of economic sanctions against Russia. On the other, the constant donation of military aid to Ukraine, something that President Zelensky has been thankful for, but his expectations had not been met. On March 24th, he thanked NATO and the European Union for working together to support Ukraine. But he also said that if these steps had been taken earlier, Russia might have had second thoughts about invading.
NATO has never been more united than it is today. Putin is getting exactly the opposite what he intended to have as a consequence of going into Ukraine.
Congratulations.
On 24th March, the leaders of the 30 NATO countries, the Group of 7, and the 27 European Union countries held unprecedented back-to-back summits in Brussels. At the end of it, more economic sanctions were announced against Russia and more military aid promised to Ukraine. That evening, delivering an address to Ukraine, President Zelensky said, "We need to look for peace," adding that Russia also needs to look for peace.